touche, to right, I stammered. Last place, low pace and mild-mannered. It's okay, alright when I get in my bed. It's okay, it's alright when I get in my bed. Late dates, don't leave a lipstick collar. Mates rates on saving me $1. If crooks were books then I'm a scholar. It's okay, alright when I get in my bed. It's okay, it's alright when I get in my bed.
In Australia, we expect our government to serve we the people. We expect our courts to provide lawful remedy when our rights and interests are under attack. We expect our constitution to be the rule book for our government. What if these foundations have been hijacked? Australia. We are young. Our home offers diversity in land, culture, and the outdoor lifestyle. From beautiful beaches to packed sports stadiums to backyard barbecues. Our history may be short, but it is rich with rapid development and international recognition. Our freedom and lifestyle is what we pride the most. We are laid back and easygoing. We have been stereotyped over the decades with values that include humility, tolerance, simplicity, and a dry sense of humour. We celebrate life and feel fortunate to live in one of the luckiest countries on earth. On a few occasions in our history, we were called on to defend our nation and our freedoms. No fuss, we never balked from our duties. Today, as the world changes at a rapid rate, our political leaders seem to be losing popularity and credibility. Laws are slowly eroding our freedoms, while the will of the people is being ignored. This is a story affecting every Australian. During what seemed a simple task, importing the car from America to Australia, we'll see how the refusal of import approval by the Australian Department of Transport led to uncovering shocking truths about our so-called customs. Scott Bartle bought a 1959 Chevrolet Corvette in Chicago. This classic was converted to right-hand drive, ready for Australian roads. It had been fully restored, maintaining the original 1959 look. It was fitted with a modern engine, suspension, brakes, and air conditioning. The air conditioning would later prove to be a tipping point for Scott. First, Scott believed he had to get import approval from the Department of Transport. Scott was refused import approval twice before escalating the matter to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. The Department of Transport attempted to subvert their own guidelines. Expressed graphically, it was obvious the Department of Transport were attempting to change the rules. When the Department of Transport were caught out, they pulled their own guidelines they had relied on to deny import approval.
Here are the import approval guidelines for your car. Great, but you can't use them. Why can't I use them? They are not law. So why did you publish them? We make the rules around here. So what about the guidelines? Get stuffed.
Not surprisingly, Scott beat the Department of Transport conventionally in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. This news made page 3 of the Australian Financial Review. Now with import approval, it turned ugly. Demand was made to apply for a pre-charged equipment licence, essentially a licence to import the air conditioner.
I'm looking at this logic going, I've got import approval for a car, and now I need import approval for an air conditioner within the car. Next thing you know, I'll need an import approval for the clock for the radio. What else?
With demand to apply for a license to import an air conditioner in a car that was already approved for import, Scott became suspicious, to say the least.
What's this money going to do to the gas that's in the air conditioner? Is it by waving some green stuff, some money over the top of it, is it going to make this gas green? Is it going to disappear? Where's this gas going to go? Is it going to get taken out at one end and put in at the other end? What happens to this gas? And basically it's all about money, isn't it?
Pushed over the edge, Scott began to realise he could either submit and comply or challenge those demanding money from him just because they said so.
Well, I think to put it in the context of things that we're familiar with, say for example the pizza delivery guy comes along and delivers you the pizza and he said, look, there's $12.95 for the pizza and I want $50 for delivery. You'd look at him and go, what's this $50 for? You're not afraid to challenge him as to what this charge is all about, and you're not going to pay him just because he said so.
We're not afraid to challenge the pizza delivery kid or a telephone company overcharging us. But what about the government?
Are you really government?
Of course we are. Are you crazy?
Can you prove it?
Now the same thing applies when we're dealing with government, is we get on the phone or we write them a notice and say, well, what's this charge all about? And show me the evidence that it's lawful, because I'm not going to pay you just because you said so.
After 9 months of frustration with government agencies, Scott started to notice inconsistencies that would ordinarily seem trivial to most of us.
And I'm starting to see little things like copyright symbols on some of these websites, these government websites, and I'm going, nah, what's all this copyright bit about? Who owns that copyright? What's going on here? And 9 times out of 10, this copyright symbol was next to the Commonwealth of Australia, and I'm going, well, I thought I was part of the Commonwealth of Australia, being we the people. I started digging a little bit deeper, and next thing you know, I've come across this company called the Commonwealth of Australia that's registered with the Securities Exchange Commission in Washington.
Why is our Commonwealth registered in Washington, D.C.? And why is our emblem registered as a trademark with the United States Patent and Trademark Office? But what about the original emblem on our Constitution, on our buildings and our courts?
So I'm presented with essentially this idea that there might be 2 Commonwealths. The Commonwealth being the colony, comprising of we the people, and I've got this other Commonwealth which is looking like a corporation registered in Washington, with shareholders, an annual report that's available, a prospectus, and all those typical things that come with a company. I'm wondering if our taxes are going to shareholders or we the people. And I want to make sure that I'm paying my monies to the right people.
Not only are there 2 Commonwealths, Scott discovered there were 2 governments.
Government in the Constitution is called the Government of the Commonwealth, and we've got this one that turns up in our letterbox called the Australian Government. Now, either someone's changed the Constitution without us knowing about it, i.e. slipped in a referendum that we missed, or one of them's wrong, because they can't be both. If you don't have the evidence that this entity has changed and became this entity, without the evidence of a name change, i.e. this change over, you have 2 entities.
Why don't you just pay them?
Pay who?
Government.
Which government?
You know. Government.
Did you know there's 2 of them?
Bugger.
Another example is the Parliament of the Commonwealth. That's what it's called within the Constitution. It's specifically defined as the Parliament of the Commonwealth. And yet you go online and you see the Parliament of Australia. Two different names, both parliaments, in theory. Where's the evidence that the Parliament of the Commonwealth changed and became the Parliament of Australia? Without any evidence that that one became something different, there must be two. And the minute you've found or determined that there's two entities, one of them is defined back through the Constitution, is valid, the other one is an imposter, and you can tell that one to go away, or you can treat it entirely differently.
In support of challenging the validity of laws, Scott came across a quote from a former Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia.
A pretended law made in excess of power is not and never has been a law at all. Anybody in the country is entitled to disregard it.
Did the Chief Justice provide us with the means to challenge the validity of law in Australia?
Now, for me, that said a couple of things. It said, one, that there are pretend laws in the country. Two, that it's our job to challenge them. And three, that it's the originator's duty to demonstrate that they're legitimate.
What if they can't? What if today's politicians and public servants can't validate an act? Are we looking at a pretend law?
We're not quite sure whether we're dealing with two commonwealths, and we've got the possibility that some of these acts that are being imposed upon us are not real. They're pretend laws.
So you are the Department of Sustainability, Environment, Water, Population and Communities.
Yes, you have to apply for a license to import the air conditioner in your car.
Can you prove that?
No. Just pay me.
I think I'll call you the Department of Unlawful Air Conditioning.
Scott challenged the department to demonstrate they were a de jure government and whether they had any lawful acts to rely upon, namely one that would require a licence to import an air conditioner.
So I've written a notice off to the Department of Unlawful Air Conditioning and said, well, you demonstrate that you work for this Commonwealth, the legitimate one, and I'd also like you to demonstrate that your acts are valid. And in the absence of that, well, I'm not paying, because I want to make sure that my money is going to the right Commonwealth. I don't want to be defrauding the people of the Commonwealth, the people, my neighbours, and instead be sending funds through the corporation over to shareholders in the States. Not going to have a part of that.
Faced with the prospect of challenging government, Scott ran the risk of being singled out amongst his peers for cheating government.
You're cheating government.
Are my taxes really going to Australians?
Of course they are.
What if they go to the Commonwealth registered in Washington, D.C.?
Washington. Good point.
Is paying Washington cheating fellow Australians?
Yes.
Paying taxes to the Commonwealth of Australia, registered in Washington, D.C., appears to be cheating we the people here in Australia.
So, who is cheating who?
So what do we have here? Two Commonwealths? Two governments? Two parliaments?
Now, if we put this in the proper context, if I'm paying those taxes to a corporation and its funds trace back up through to Washington, to shareholders, who am I defrauding by paying my taxes to that mob instead of to the legitimate de jure government department that comprises of we the people here in Australia?
Miraculously, the Department of Unlawful Air Conditioning's supposed law requiring Scott to apply for a pre-charged equipment licence was waived and conveniently recategorised Scott's Corvette as a personal effect.
Next thing you know, I hear through my customs broker that, oh, you're exempt. We've assessed your car as a personal effect, almost as if it's a toothbrush or a necklace.
Although Scott did not have to part with $400, his questions remained unanswered. Was the requirement to apply for a license simply a money grab? Why is it that Scott noticed so many inconsistencies and irregularities? Why was he so meticulous? A look into his background tells the story. Scott worked his way up to first officer and captain aboard luxury mega yachts, some worth around $100 million. Scott was no slouch when it came to dealing with customs clearances for vessels and crew in over 40 countries throughout the Caribbean, South Pacific, Mediterranean, Baltic Seas, Indian and Atlantic Oceans. Scott also had a degree in project management. He managed the refurbishment of 2 luxury yachts and delivered one to the Monaco Boat Show, winning praise as the best presented yacht.
My employers were billionaires. They were some of the fussiest people on the planet, and as a result I had to be meticulous. That might explain why I noticed so many details that normally are missed.
12 years of international experience, an eye for detail, and Scott's 9 months wrestling with the Department of Transport all helped him see a bigger picture. For Scott, luxury car tax or GST wasn't the issue. Rather, it was who was charging it. What if customs were not a lawful department of the de jure government of the Commonwealth of Australia? Would that mean customs had no more right to impose taxes than McDonald's? Was it reasonable to expect customs demonstrate they were a de jure department of the government of the Commonwealth of Australia, comprised of we the people?
If we've got the situation where customs is not the de jure government department that we all presume and believe it is, and they're actually this corporate entity that's masquerading as government, then yeah, we've got some pretty big problems.
Bugger.
However, knowing that they're 2 different entities and the one of them's a corporation, and that it's the corporation that's got my car, and it's the corporation that's trying to charge me GST and luxury car tax, and it's the corporation that's sending me letters, then I know how to deal with them.
So what could Scott do?
My first move was to present a notice to Australian Customs and Border Protection Service in Fremantle, giving them opportunity to demonstrate that they were in fact a legitimate government department, the Department of Customs and Excise, as defined in our Constitution.
Customs were challenged to demonstrate they were not a corporate entity. And the trail of annual reports leading to the Commonwealth of Australia registered in Washington, D.C. was somehow legitimate. Wouldn't the burden of proof be on the federal government, who Customs reports to prove they don't report to Washington, D.C.? If they couldn't, would that make them a corporate entity?
Can you prove Australian Customs and Border Protection Service is a real government department?
Look at my badge.
Is Customs a company?
My badge has a shiny star.
Now, to me, the way I would deal with a corporation is you would put terms and conditions in place.
Many might think that putting terms and conditions to a government department is impossible. What if Customs relied upon our presumption that they were government? What if Customs couldn't prove they were a real government department?
What proof can you show me Customs is legitimate?
My badge is very impressive.
Absent that proof, they would be treated as if they were a corporate entity. And within my first notice, I provided terms and conditions that would govern the relationship between myself and Customs. Now, that notice, I gave them 7 calendar days to respond to me and give me the evidence that they were in fact legitimate. Absent that evidence, the position that would be taken, or the default position if you like, was that they were the corporate entity and that terms and conditions would apply.
We all deal with companies entering lawfully binding contracts every day. We download music. We park our cars. And unless we agree to that company's terms and conditions, we have to go elsewhere for that service.
Are you really government?
Why should anyone from Australian Customs and Border Protection Service respond? Why should they have to demonstrate they were a legitimate government department?
Why should they have to prove anything?
They demand we prove our identity. Let's see theirs.
But they are government.
Really? Are there certificates of commission just for decoration?
But they have to be government.
Personating a Commonwealth officer is a crime punishable by up to 2 years in jail.
The mere existence of such a crime indicates there may be those who claim government status yet do not have it. That is, they are masquerading as government. Could we even expect today's public servants to be aware they represent a corporate entity?
2 years in jail. Damn sure I'd reply.
What if you were not government?
I'd shut up.
What are the ramifications of not being able to challenge laws or government? Does that place government above the law?
Essentially, the ramifications would be that any law could be brought in without accountability. No one would have to answer to anyone for the ability to produce such a law, and we as the people would just get steamrolled and basically have to comply with absolutely everything.
Based on what the Chief Justice said in 1942 about pretend laws, Scott wanted to know if GST and luxury car tax were also pretend laws.
So I hear there are pretend laws in Australia. What about the law for luxury car tax?
What do you mean? It is the law. You have to pay.
But is it legitimate?
That's irrelevant. You have to pay.
Is it a pretend law?
Just pay. Damn it.
With all these frequently unanswered questions, are we the ones assuming customs are government?
I was asking about the validity of the origin of those acts and the validity of the existence of that actual department and whether they actually were a department.
Scott gave Customs 7 days to demonstrate they were a department of the de jure government of the Commonwealth of Australia. Was 7 days enough? Customs Client Service Charter outlined a response could be expected within 5 working days. In order to validate any response from Customs, Scott turned to our Constitution. He was careful not to look at the Constitution of the Commonwealth registered in Washington, D.C.
The Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government.
Now, if the Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia suggested that there's pretend laws, then I'm joining the dots here and I'm wanting to know exactly whether this GST and the luxury car tax is legitimate. And I would expect that it would be a simple matter of reaching into the top drawer and going, yep, here's the royal assent that was granted on that act. This is how it came in. Here you go. There's the evidence. Thank you very much.
Scott was unwilling to accept customs were lawful just because they said so.
Can you prove that?
No. Just pay me.
A simple letter was not going to suffice. I wanted someone to stake their reputation and their professional responsibility, if they were a so-called public servant, to swear that Australian Customs and Border Protection Service was the department of Customs and Excise. I wanted someone to really swear the truth that that is what's going on, almost as if it were giving court testimony.
Customs were meant to respond within 5 business days. They didn't respond at all.
Well, in the same way that if you don't pay your telephone bill, the telephone company will send you a reminder notice, I sent Customs a reminder notice, essentially, reminding them of all the terms and conditions that would apply in the absence of their ability to demonstrate they were the same legitimate Department of Customs and Excise. So it's a reminder notice, it's an honourable thing, it gives them another 7 days to provide that evidence I was looking for.
Remember, Customs still have Scott's Corvette, and they haven't proven they are really government, and are looking more and more like a subsidiary company of the Commonwealth registered in Washington, D.C. By remaining silent, have Customs set aside their own client service charter and thereby tacitly agreed to being a corporate entity?
Is Customs a company?
My badge has a shiny star.
Many may argue that remaining silent does not constitute an agreement. Does that mean we can avoid agreements by remaining silent? A plastic card inserted into an ATM will be ejected if no buttons are pressed within a certain time. A court may rule against the party if no defence is submitted within a specified period. Debt collectors issue notices of demand, and the ATO issues default assessments in the same way. And surprise, surprise, so do Customs. Invariably, the expiry of time triggers an agreed outcome by default. Without this, one may avoid resolution of any issue simply by remaining silent. To invalidate the notices Scott served to Customs would require the invalidation of these same processes commonly used worldwide.
Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act.
The notice of default was to formalise the fact that no response had been received to the first 2 presentments, and to lay out that the terms and conditions that were now agreed upon by the parties, in this case by the absence of any objection, would apply from that point onwards.
Customs had every opportunity to prove they were not a corporate entity. As a company, they had every opportunity to reject Scott's terms and conditions. Before being invoiced, Customs made a conscious decision not to release Scott's Corvette.
You have to pay.
It was this decision, this action, that constituted further acceptance of Scott's terms. No different to driving into a car park, the action of entering the car park confirms acceptance of the terms. So when Customs chose to seize Scott's Corvette as surety for the payment of an unsubstantiated charge, namely GST and luxury car tax, they chose to receive an invoice in accordance with Scott's terms.
What I've done is essentially defined a period of reasonable release for my Corvette, absent evidence that Customs was the legitimate Department of Customs and Excise, and that the acts for GST and luxury car tax were valid. And beyond that date, Customs seizing my Corvette as surety for the payment of those taxes, I started counting the days. So 14 days in, after this reasonable date of release, I sent them an invoice.
And it's not like Scott was being unreasonable.
And on the invoice, I gave them a nice little waiver that said I would waive this entire invoice if they were able to demonstrate that those acts were legitimate, that they were not working for this corporation based over in Washington. I said, how much more reasonable can I be? And all they had to do was demonstrate that they were legitimate and that their acts were valid.
Yet again, Customs chose to set aside their client service charter and remain silent, thereby declining the waiver offered. It appeared Customs either did not want to demonstrate they were real government, or they weren't.
Bugger.
Gave them the final notice on the first invoice, sent them a third invoice, and gave them the opportunity to waive that one. Every opportunity, every step of the way, all I'm asking for is evidence that they're legitimate and that their acts are valid. And now they're getting themselves into this invoiced situation where I've given them every opportunity to waive the invoices, and still they're setting aside their customer service charter to respond within 5 business days, and they're sitting there stone cold silent.
After 3 notices, 3 invoices, 2 statements, and 2 overdue notices, Customs finally responded 59 days after Scott's first notice.
I knew government would respond.
Customs' letter initially appeared convincing for Scott.
It's crap. Doesn't answer your question.
When I read that letter, there's a certain amount of fear, I suppose, and as I'm reading through, and perhaps that's the programming that's come through from years and years of expecting government to be government. And yet, line by line by line, it was just saying, you have to do this, this has to be done, this has to be done, this has to be done. And so the reaction within me was quite fearful. It was as if my hopes had been dashed on this, until I started reading between the lines and capturing every word exactly what it meant. And that put one hell of a smile on my face as I realised exactly what was going on.
What do we tell him?
Quote the Customs Act, or something.
What about his questions?
Ignore them. He can't opt out.
What if I cut and paste some generic crap?
Brilliant idea. Fill it up and make it look convincing.
Not one of Scott's questions was answered.
And so what's happening when I look at this letter from Customs is I went looking through there for what wasn't said. Where's the information that I was demanding? Where's the evidence that says Australian Customs and Border Protection Service are actually the Department of Customs and Excise? Where's the evidence in that letter that says the Act for Luxury Car Tax and GST was lawfully brought into existence? Rather than just quote me from the Act, where's the evidence I was looking for?
Look at my badge.
By avoiding Scott's questions, were Customs acting as if they were above the law?
I don't care. It's baseless.
Was Customs' letter deliberately deceptive?
They referred to the fact that laws were created within the Parliament of the Commonwealth. And I went, well, yeah, that's what it's defined within our Constitution. However, the first question that came up was, which Parliament did the law for GST and luxury car tax come from? Did those laws or acts come out of the Parliament of the Commonwealth, like I'm being told by Customs, or did it come from the Parliament of Australia, like we see on the website and currently sitting in Canberra at the moment? Which Parliament were these laws coming from? Because if they're coming from the Parliament of Australia, well, that'd smack quite nicely of the pretend laws that the Chief Justice was talking about.
Customs were factually correct in citing the Parliament of the Commonwealth of we the people, leaving Scott to presume the acts for GST and luxury car tax came from the same Parliament.
They're sitting over in the land of we can't justify our own existence. We're pointing at the legitimate system as to how laws are created and expecting me to presume that they're one and the same. And I've drawn the distinction between the two of them and asked for the evidence, and it hasn't been provided.
Was the Act for GST given royal assent by a properly commissioned Governor-General?
Your claims are baseless.
You're not listening. I didn't make a claim. I asked a question.
I don't care. It's baseless.
Customs letter made it clear they had no intention to pay Scott's invoices. Was this express intent to breach the contract? Typically, one would turn to the courts to resolve breaches of contract. But what happens if our courts do not serve Australians? Rather, they serve the Commonwealth registered in Washington, D.C. To validate the courts in Australia, Scott turned to letters patent and instructions issued by the late Queen Victoria in 1900.
The Governor-General may constitute and appoint in our name and on our behalf all such judges, commissioners, justices of the peace and other necessary officers and ministers of our said Commonwealth.
What if Australia didn't have a properly commissioned Governor-General, commissioned in accordance with letters patent of the late Queen Victoria? Who would give royal assent to acts? Would Australia have a lawful commissioner for taxation? Would Australia have a lawful police commissioner? How about lawfully appointed judges?
Are the judges commissioned by a properly commissioned Governor-General?
That's irrelevant. Just take us to court.
Could Australians take those falsely claiming government status to a real court?
Do the judges work for the Commonwealth registered in Washington?
What if they were? Take us to court.
Subsequent research indicated that the last lawful commission of a Governor-General for the Commonwealth comprising of we the people was in 1927. Letters patent and instructions from Queen Victoria in 1900 outlined exactly how a Governor-General must be commissioned, and they categorically reserved the power and authority to revoke those letters patent to heirs and successors of the late Queen Victoria.
So the real question is, were the recent letters patent that today's Australian government rely upon, which supposedly revoked the 1900 letters patent, issued under the Great Seal of the United Kingdom? And were those recent letters patent issued by an heir and successor to the late Queen Victoria?
Is today's Governor-General working for the Commonwealth registered in Washington, D.C.?
Is the Governor-General commissioned by our Queen?
No. She works for us.
I thought the Queen appointed her.
We have a queen too.
Is she our Queen?
No. We created one called the Queen of Australia.
Is that reason?
It works for us.
Am I going to be faced with justices who report back through Canberra to Washington to that Commonwealth and not the Commonwealth comprising of we the people? And am I going to be faced with a situation where I can't take customs to court because I'm dealing with a judicial system that's owned by the same company?
Bugger.
In the absence of a de jure justice system, and based on Scott's maritime background, Scott served a lien against customs. Liens are used by companies worldwide. For example, shipping companies claim ownership over goods until invoices are paid. And so do customs. Scott's lien effectively mirrored the same due process courts use.
Well, the lien is essentially no more than an affidavit that lays out line by line separate points or the statements of fact of what happened. It lays out allegations and it puts the onus and responsibility onto the other party that lien is addressed to come back with evidence that would rebut each one of those points. And it's no different than in a court case. The allegations are laid, and the job of the other party is to rebut those points.
The directors of Australian Customs and Border Protection Service were served the lien because directors are responsible for the actions of a company. Whereas previously it had taken 59 days for Customs to respond, a letter was received almost instantly from the Director of Litigation. Customs did not rebut any point within the lien. Rather than simply address Scott's challenge, Customs chose to attack it. However, they were very careful.
And so what I was seeing here was not an actual threat, but a potential threat. We may refer this matter to the Federal Police. We may reference the Criminal Code. We may do this. And I'm having a great old laugh because it would appear that they've taken very seriously the matter that making threats without basis are going to cop them an invoice.
What if the Federal Police worked for the same Commonwealth as Customs? The company registered in Washington, D.C. Scott wrote to the Federal Police. They were advised determination would be made of the capacity in which they act should they become involved. Nothing further was heard from the Australian Federal Police. 30 days into the lien against Customs, Scott still had no evidence Customs were a department of the real government.
Can you prove it?
Customs wanted Scott to pay the GST and luxury car tax and then take them to court.
What didn't I get as in the way of a response from Customs?
You won't prove any of your acts are valid.
You may elect to have the matter dealt with by a court.
I didn't get any evidence or validation that the act that was used to substantiate or charge GST or luxury car tax was in fact lawful.
You won't even prove that you are real government.
So what? Take us to court.
I didn't get any evidence that they were the same Department of Customs and Excise as defined within our Constitution. I didn't get any evidence that those acts came from the Parliament of the Commonwealth. I didn't get this, I didn't get that, I didn't get this, I didn't get that. All the way through. Bang. Sent it back and said, here you go, have another 10 days, have another opportunity to provide me with that information demonstrating that all of this is legitimate, rebut any of my terms, all of my points that I've laid out in the affidavit, give me some evidence.
So you can't even prove the courts are valid?
I don't care. Just take us to court.
With no rebuttal to the lien by Customs, it was perfected after 90 days. By not defending against the lien, Customs had agreed to all allegations and invoices, confirming the lien as the ultimate statement of facts in the matter, just like default judgment in a court. Scott's research uncovered that Australian car owners are presently going through hell, forced to pay mechanics to degas their air conditioners to meet an unsubstantiated act, and then pay again to have it recharged. And yet Scott was exempt, seemingly by asking, "Who are you?"
A friend of mine had a package seized at Perth Airport. Customs demanded payment of GST and duty. They sent a first notice, a reminder notice, and then a final notice. At that point, we crafted a notice of our own for Customs to demonstrate they were a legitimate government department and that their acts were valid. 3 weeks later,
I got a knock on the door and my package had arrived. I thought it might have been an accident, and then I got a letter from Customs. Customs had instructed Australia Post to release my package.
Why does the same process work for Nick's package, but not Scott's Corvette? Were Customs simply incompetent or criminal?
I purchased a video projector back in March 2012 as an experiment to see if I could repeat the same success. Customs in Melbourne seized my projector and then sent me demand for GST. I sent them a demand exactly as I did for my Corvette and exactly as my friend had done. And, surprise, surprise, my projector turned up. No duty was demanded, equivalent to luxury car tax on the Corvette. They didn't even demand GST.
We make the rules around here, and we break them too.
The Department of Unlawful Air Conditioning couldn't substantiate any charges when asked, "Who are you?" Customs at Perth Airport couldn't substantiate any charges when asked, "Who are you?" And Customs in Melbourne couldn't substantiate their charges when asked, "Who are you?"
Customs in Fremantle have not been able to substantiate their charges in 12 months, yet Scott's Corvette is still held hostage.
That's ridiculous. Governments don't do that.
These frequently unanswered questions and unsubstantiated charges should throw every aspect of government in Australia under the spotlight. Stamp duty, taxation, registration, licenses, rates, every Australian is affected. Many Australians won't give a rat's. Many would prefer to pay an unsubstantiated charge than to question it. And among those who do question charges, who questions the validity of who sent it? Could this be the solution? Simply asking, who are you? By insisting on government proving their lawful validity, imposters will stick out like dog's balls. I asked Scott, could there be any possible explanation for the appearance of two governments?
Well, I've asked the Minister for Transport, the Minister for Local Government, the Minister for Police, the Minister for Environment, and recently the Minister for Justice, and not one of them even attempted to provide me an explanation. So if we have government of the people, we've got a bunch of politicians who are totally incompetent. They can't even answer simple questions. Alternatively, our representatives arrogantly refuse to answer those who elected them. And that's the best case scenario.
Wow. If that's the best case scenario, what would be the worst?
Well, for starters, we'd have pretend laws. We'd have corporations masquerading as government, controlling our courts, police, taxation and councils, and then sending all the profits to shareholders overseas.
Personating a Commonwealth officer is a crime punishable by up to 2 years in jail.
Australians may be laid back, but we are sure quick to stand up for giving people a fair go, and we are totally committed to protecting our rights and freedoms. We are at a crossroads with the silence being experienced to very important questions. If there are legitimate answers, then Scott has exposed a level of incompetence that is a threat to our national security. Our ability to defend against people impersonating government officials has been nullified. This alone should raise the alarm. No country should be allowed to be this vulnerable to corruption and outside threats to our sovereignty. If there are no legitimate answers, then we are confronted with what could be best described as treason by stealth. Frequently unanswered questions by the Australian government cannot be tolerated any longer, and we need to unite and ensure they are held accountable. So what can you do to help? What can you do to help find the truth? Instead of driving his Corvette for the past 12 months, Scott has been the driving force behind the website truthnow.net. This website gives you the tools to ask vital questions of those claiming government status. Everything on the website is free. You can download pre-written letters to ask your representatives who they represent. And you can share this documentary through social media.
We've been taught not to question government. When problems arise, we say government should do something about it. When that responsibility is shifted, too often as Aussies we say, she'll be right, or no worries, mate. But is it? If a law made in excess of power is not a law at all, then anyone masquerading as government is clearly an excess of power. Will you question today's lawmakers by asking, who are you?
Big smoke town folk are reprimanded, young blokes flat broken, barely standing. Fair goes far gone when they're commanding. It's okay, alright when I get in my bed. Try hard, try not to fall or fumble. Die hard, riots, this world may crumble. No fear, top gear will steer and stumble. It's okay, alright when I get in my bed. It's okay, it's alright, it's okay, alright when I get in my bed. It's okay, it's alright when I get in my bed.
If you are listening to this, you are the resistance.
NBC, Q
I'm not moving, I'ma be right here, I'm not moving. I'ma be right here, I'm not moving. I'ma be right here, I'm not moving. Let's go! 99, 99, 99 to 1. We awake this town, let's march to the drum. 99, 99, 99 to 1. We just getting started, we ain't done. 99, 99, 99 to 1. Your time's up or we'll be done. 99, 99, 99 to 1. We awake this town, let's march to the drum. 99% rules the 1%, not the other way around. I'm here to circumvent against all the tyranny, stripped of our dignity. I'm here to reclaim our liberty and let it ring throughout the world, let it resonate. Brothers and sisters, gather round, history's made. We march in the streets, breaking the walls down.